it's a new phenomenon that we address 75 as young now. I like to say that.
Well, I like hearing that. I'm not 75 yet, but I'm in my 70s. So,
Dr. Roland McCraty is the Director of Research at the HeartMath Institute and a pioneering figure in the field of psycho-physiological coherence, heart-brain interactions, and emotional physiology. Today, we link it all to the principles of longevity. I met a man at an event called RadFest who walked up and was talking to a friend of mine. And I think he was about 70 at the time. He just had this pep to his step. He had all this energy. Mm-hmm. And my friend said, "Where do you get this spunk?" And he goes, "Oh man, I'm just getting started." And I was like, what a perspective.
Yeah. Well, I kind of feel that way. I kind of feel that way.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I would imagine all of the ways that you practice heart coherence helps you feel like that's a viable reality.
God, yes. Oh, God, yes.
And that's why we're talking today.
Okay.
And I want to talk about it scientifically because this community is scientific. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are too many people out there who, when they talk about coherence, they also talk about softer things like harmony and balance but you mean it in a different way.
There's a I would say a physiological state correlate, but really the coherence that we're talking about is much deeper than what's physiologically shown up in our heart rhythms.
Well, let's get into it. Tell me first, just broadly, what does coherence mean to you?
Oh, well, okay. So I guess we're starting. Okay. Well, Sandy, coherence, that's a term that's used in all branches of science, from the very small, molecular level all the way to the describing the universe. And it embraces a lot of important things, but I think fundamentally it's used to describe the harmonious order of the parts of a system. Are they working together in an energy efficient, harmonious way? And another kind of key thing that a lot of people don't think of at coherence or in a coherent system is that the wholeness or the output of whatever that thing or system is greater than the sum of the parts. Right? So there's a lot embedded in that. But I think for this conversation, the simple way of thinking is all the different glands, organs, systems, immune system, hormonal system, nervous system, working together in a coordinated way that optimizes energy flow through the system and energy efficiency. So if you think about it, that without that happening, and quite literally an aspect of coherence would embrace a lot of scientific terms like synchronization. So we know, for example, that the brain and nervous system literally has to be able to synchronize its own activity, electrical activity, to even be awake and conscious, let alone perform well. So that's an aspect of coherence, right? Mm-hmm. How in sync are the parts, right? So if you think about it, what wouldn't that facilitate? Does that make sense? Our ability to reaction times, coordination, but especially our ability to think clearly, to maintain our composure. I'll say it more nicely than I would in a lot of cases, in the midst of the chaos that might be going on in the external world, right? So I just give you kind of a feeling sense of what we're talking about here.
Well, I think the chaos that we observe in the external world is a good metaphor for the chaos that might be introduced to our internal world through unhealthy diet and lifestyle. And so yeah. How can coherence practices help to improve the synchronization and the communication that the cells need to deliver? Let's just say if I don't get enough sleep at night, or if I eat a cupcake.
All right. Well, I might flip that around, actually, if I could, your question, because, and I'm not here to say that diet is not important and what we choose to eat. Of course it is, right? And hydration and sleep and the things you're talking about. But what's far more disruptive to our inner systems and synchronization, the physiological stuff we're talking about, is what a lot of people just call stress. I mean, it's really what's going on. Well, okay, let me back up. So I'm a psychophysiologist, right? So I really look at the interface between physiological processes and thoughts, feelings, these types of things. And what a lot of people don't really realize, Sandy, is that what's the activity and the synchronized activity or coherence within our system is mostly driven by emotion. Now,
What is emotion?
a lot of men don't want to hear that. Well, what we feel, what we experience, right? So, I was just reminds me. Just last week, I was having a conversation with a fellow biohacker, right, in the San Francisco area, who is a personal trainer, right, and so he's getting ready to take on a heart math approach and to study how it affects him and all that kind of stuff. So, as the conversation went on, he said, "Oh God, this is way deeper than what I thought it was. It's not just about these little devices and sine wave things." But he said, "I'm doing all this stuff right. Diet, I'm a personal trainer, exercise, and all this stuff. But I am totally stressed out, and all of my clients are as well. So I hope I'm making sense here. Well, what is stress? Let's unpack that a little bit, because I think that's what you're really asking me. Or what is emotion? Well, it's
And let me give you a little story before you say what is stress, because after my mom's stroke, she said to me, stress can kill you. I didn't know that. I was like, yeah, it can.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And she just really didn't know. She identified with her stress. It gave her nuances to her personality that she clung to. And now she just lets it go.
Yeah.
Because she realizes it's deadly. And so tell me a little bit more about stress.
Yeah, because stress is kind of a safe word. You're stressing me out, or God, I'm really right. So I think we need to distinguish here. So because there's a real thing like physical stress. We exercise too much, or we lift something too heavy. Yeah, okay, let's put that on the shelf, because the big stress, the humanity, right, and is really emotional in nature. So let me give you an example. The surveys for years done in the United States and Europe that look at stress auras. What's the thing out there that's causing us to have an internal thing? And by the way, I hear which is kind of cool, actually, a term that I'm hearing a lot in the biohacking community is triggers. That's a language that I'm starting to hear a lot more, especially in the biohack community. Being more aware of my triggers, what's triggering me, right? So it's related to this, because the stress aura is the thing out there. But what used to be, well, it still is to a large degree, the number one source of what we call stress was time pressure. Okay, which is defined as the feeling we don't have enough time, or the feeling everything's taking too long.
Well, I feel like biohackers and health optimizers feel that way about life.
Well, right, but the point I'm making is feel there, right? The feeling. Now that's sort of changing a little bit, so it's still up there, but it's interesting because some of the more recent surveys I've read about are showing that dealing with difficult people is rising to one of those people that are identifying. But the point I'm trying to get to here is two things, Sandy. One is, if we look physiologically, it's emotions that run the show. Now, that's so easy to prove here in the lab. And I have you wired up measuring your brain waves and your blood pressure and your heart rhythms and blah, 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 all this stuff we do. And mentally stress you, like make you do subtractions mentally or these different things, right? Yeah, you can measure some changes, but not much, really. But once you trigger an emotion, I get embarrassed because I can't do subtractions well, or I get frustrated with that experience. Man, big changes happen quick in our hormones, our blood pressure, the activity in our brain and nervous system. So the point I'm trying to make is emotions run the show physiologically.
There's also a pretty prevalent point of view out there that we are to let our emotions run through us, and we are to experience them in order to
Yeah.
be psychologically
Okay.
healthy.
Yeah. Okay. We'll
Yeah.
come back to that in a second. But before we go there, and we should go there,
Yeah.
we were kind of what is stress, right? Mm-hmm. So it's always the kind of stress I'm talking about. It's always an emotion, mm-hmm. right? It's what's happening out there doesn't match with what I want to happen, right? Yeah. So it's those whether we're consciously aware of these emotions or feelings, right? Or not, it's still having the same effect physiologically. And this is a major factor in longevity and healthy aging, by the way. That's why I want to bring this up. But it's really, let's look under the hood. It's feelings of frustration, impatience, anxiety, right? Looping worry, fear, overwhelm. These are all feelings and emotions that are driving the activity in our system.
And you've done studies that show, for example, an intense stressor or worry will spike an immune response and then it collapses, right?
Yeah, just feeling frustration for just a few minutes depresses the immune response for 6 hours.
Wow.
Just one episode of that. Now think about most people as they navigate daily life.
Is that cumulative? You may not know from isolated studies, but if I live a life of frustration...
Well, it's absolutely cumulative. That's the whole point here, right? Mm. Anyway, so that kind of give you an answer. So,
it does.
And by the way, things like impatience, it's, probably a lot of people talk about it, but it's one of those, anxiety would be another one, right? They become, and this would probably be a whole other interview, by the way, but if we feel those often enough, they become so familiar what the brain processes. Well, I'm going to get too complicated here. What's familiar is what's comfortable. And so if we're, in a situation where anxiety might be appropriate, if that's really ever true, but there aren't, or it becomes what we call an internal baseline. Mm-hmm. And the brain, that's where it becomes comfortable. So we're not even consciously aware we're living in anxiety or impatience. It's kind of under the radar now, still having the same physiological effects. Right. So now when that's going on, then you've just described the physiology of rapid aging. Does that make sense to you?
It makes perfect sense, and why I want to have this conversation about aging and longevity with you, because when I had my last Biohacker Expo event, I stood on the stage and said, there's a lot of cool stuff in that room that you can do to improve your health, but if you don't order your internal state, it doesn't actually work.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it doesn't actually work.
Well, some of them can have limited effect. I'll give an example from my own life.
There you go.
They don't work to the extent that they could possibly work.
Yeah,
so like
absolutely.
When I had mold in my brain, I went straight for the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, but I didn't know it was mold in my brain. I just knew that I had lost my ability to think clearly, and oxygen's great for that.
Yeah.
But if there's mold in there, it doesn't actually work so well and can cause headaches. And so a $27,000 chamber didn't help me. And so things that look like a one-size-fits-all solution may not work at all if the state isn't I had to detox, which requires a coherent state. I don't think people realize that detoxification requires that the body be able to communicate on every level with itself.
Mm-hmm. Right, so, which is another way of describing coherence.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Cool. And so tell me a little bit about, let's talk about emotions, experiencing them, good or bad. I heard a study once that one of those break rooms for anger causes people more stress in the long term than just sitting.
Well, you're absolutely right. And there's a number of examples of that. And probably too deep to get into here, but we really understand the physiology of that now. Mm. And I was kind of hinting at it earlier about familiar, not familiar. This is also a big thing back in, see, I'm an old guy now. I remember back what went on in the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah, but you're just getting started.
I know, but still, so we're kind of looping again.
Yeah.
Because there was the break rooms and the companies selling Nerf bats and things, right, to let your anger out, Well, they found that made it worse.
Yeah. And
the reason that makes it worse, and this is also research, pretty even better research from the trauma community that also says the same thing. I won't go into that now, but what you're doing, okay, I'm going to let my anger out. Bang, crash, whatever. What you're doing is reinforcing that as the familiar. The brain wants a match between the current and the familiar. So if that becomes your baseline, it's really not helpful. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm certainly not advocating or saying, Sandy, we should suppress emotions. That's worse. Well, or as bad. It's really about transformation. It's about learning that first of all, that we have an inner control panel is one way of thinking of it. We have the ability to self-regulate our emotional experience, or think of it as your emotional diet. And I guarantee you that if people got on to being able to do that, even to a 1/10 of a degree of the energy they spend on reading labels on bottles and food packaging, the output, the difference it would make it's wild, right?
It's taken me a long time to figure out how to personally get into a state of physiological coherence. And I have to take a shortcut because I didn't grow up in a way that allowed me to intentionally experience elevated emotions. And
well, did any of us? I mean, maybe somebody does. I certainly didn't either.
Oh, I'd love to know if you had any transitions to get there. You probably can go at will now, but for me, I have to chant. Humming will get me into a state of psycho-physiological coherence, and then I can move on from that and deal with things with better resilience. But I can't really think myself there very well. What are your thoughts on that?
You can't. Boy, there's so many ways we could go here that I'd take a little more time to unfold. But all right, I'm going to go down this road after all. I was trying to avoid it, but one of my mentors, I have to give credit to here, is a guy named Dr. Carl Pribram, really famous guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but he was considered the father of modern cognitive neuroscience, and is kind of a legend. He's now passed, but he spent a lot of time here at HeartMath. And he's a guy that coined the term executive function to describe the frontal cortex, and was one of the first to map out the limbic system. And I mean, just on and on, invented half of the things that we rely on these days. But one of his passions was, how do we feel? What is emotion? What is experience? And so I'm going to kind of tell a little bit longer, a little more complicated story as simply as I can. And we have the amygdalas, right? A lot of people have heard of those guys, right? There's two of them. And it's clear that the amygdala is a key brain region and in association with other neural structures and centers, but is one of the key areas in emotional experience. But what it actually does, this is so misunderstood, and it's relative to what you asked me earlier about letting emotions go and all that. What the amygdala does is determine what is familiar and what is not familiar. That's what it does. Okay, now the different parts of the amygdala are doing that from the internal body systems, what we call interoception, right? And another part of the amygdala is doing that from the external sensory systems, what we see, hear, smell, taste, so on. Now, to do that, it has to have a reference that you're comparing the now or the current input to. Okay, make sense?
Yes.
If it's familiar or not familiar, what are you comparing to? So what it's comparing to is what's called our baseline, or our physiological baseline in this case. So let's take the internal sensory systems. Now, let me put put another piece of the puzzle here to why the heart and heart rate variability and coherence is so darn important in this context. As we now know, well, it's been known since the late 1800s, that the heart sends more information to the brain than the other way around.
And yet people still don't know that.
Well, they did and forgot it, and then it all got about the brain. And
yeah.
That's another story. But anyway, we have a lot of neural information coming up from the heart and cardiovascular system. It goes to every major brain center, but directly to the amygdalas. In fact, what's called the core nucleus of the amygdalas are synchronized to the heartbeat. So every time the heart beats, there's a firing of the core nucleus in the amygdala. So it's basically monitoring the heart rhythm patterns, right, which are directly reflecting emotions, by the way, right? So anxiety looks different than frustration, and or regenerative emotions look very different than those depleting emotions. Anyway, so that let me give an example here before I go on with the neurophysiology. I had when I was a little kid, one of my grandmothers drove us crazy, Sandy, with her in consistent worry. Worried about everything. Now, she grew up in an era, so this is 50s, right? Depression, all of that. So I now understand, looking back, that her baseline had become one of anxiety. You felt anxiety enough that becomes established as the familiar baseline. The brain wants a match, and it's going to do everything in its power to create a match to the familiar. Is this making sense so far?
It makes perfect sense.
Spins up, looping anxiety, worry, to feel comfortable. As crazy as that sounds, it's the way the brain works. Right? So now, same grandmother was an awesome baker. So every time we came over to grandma's house, we had fresh, warm chocolate chip cookies waiting. So there's a familiar reference there to a very positive thing in my life. So the point I'm trying to make here is it's not good, bad. It's familiar, not familiar. Am I making sense here?
I think that there's an important distinction I think we want to make when we talk about people who are seeking a way of life that extends quality of life for more years. If someone's baseline is geared towards a higher threshold of stress and worry,
right, that's become the familiar,
right, they may not notice it
exactly.
And I think I don't tend to like to genderize things, but I think it's common with maybe young mothers who are entering perimenopause to suddenly, when hormones shift, feel the physiological effects of that stress suddenly, whereas maybe their baseline had kept them from noticing. So I just use that as an example of a physiological state that can suddenly make us aware that there's an issue, but we bury it and we do it for others, right? Like we try to hold it together for our jobs and our kids and our spouses, and we don't want to be seen as not being able to handle it. And then that baseline of familiarity, it's aging us, right? That's the point here?
Well, it depends on what the baseline is.
Okay.
I mean, that's the whole point I'm trying to make here. There's a couple that are important.
But if we're time stressed and impatient...
Well, if those what we'll call stressful emotions have become our baseline,
right,
we are looping to create those to feel comfortable.
And even if we have a positive outlook about those things, like I love my kids, I love my spouse, I love my job, if I may love all of those things, but if I'm behaving in a way that's impatient and frustrated, then is that aging me?
Absolutely.
And so I think, can we explore that a little deeper?
Well,
can we talk about how?
We can, yeah, absolutely we can. But before we go there, this is so darn important, Sandy, that because hopefully you start to understand now why I said, and the studies, multiple studies show that, letting your anger out, go beat up a room or something, or yell at another person or whatever, is reinforcing that inefficient baseline.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. You actually said this earlier in a way without, I think, knowing what you were saying, maybe, is you cannot think yourself into a new baseline. Okay. You literally cannot do it. It's impossible. And this is what Dr. Pribram proved, that the only way to establish or change an existing baseline reference is to change what's called afferent, or the ascending input from the heart and cardiovascular system, because it's the primary source of rhythm, right? So just being in a heart coherent state regularly enough, especially in the first weeks of practice, is the straightest line path, because it's direct to the amygdala, of establishing that new internal rhythm as the coherent baseline. Now, this is when it becomes transformational, right? Because whether it's anxiety loops or fear, frustration and impatience starts to now become the unfamiliar and start to feel uncomfortable, where that's now replaced with a new inner baseline of, say, calm, right? Or composure.
It seems so obvious when I hear you say it, but I can think back and recognize kind of a turning point in my life when that old familiar baseline caused me discomfort. And in a very simple way, there was a turning point when I couldn't watch violent movies anymore.
Yeah, right.
It
Yeah,
was
see,
just uncomfortable.
these are all again, I'm oversimplifying things a little bit here, because it's this internal familiar, not familiar, that it doesn't matter what men, women, children, adults. This is everything we perceive is going through this process. Everything.
Yes. Okay.
Right. So I talked mostly about the internal receptive systems, but the other part of the amygdala is monitoring a neural connection between the amygdalas and what's called the thalamus, which all sensory information goes through, except smell, actually. And so the amygdala is eavesdropping on everything we see, touch, hear, and looking for familiar, not familiar. And then
What role
did you get what the importance of what I'm saying here? And this is all unconscious.
Yes. So there's two avenues that I suspect might be entry points to make that physiological shift on that baseline. Thinking can't do it, but what about belief? Is that different than thinking?
Well, yeah,
it
is different in a way, yes, but heavily biased by this process I'm talking about.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So I like to think about the anterior mid-cingulate cortex as well when I'm trying to make shifts, because it's attached to all of the senses in the body, and it's scanning for the state. But you can also access it with intention. You can make yourself believe by shifting your senses that you're in a new state, and that maybe the AMCC is a gateway to that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay. You ask good questions. All right. So let me use another example of familiar, not familiar, that might help address that.
Okay.
Because it's the amygdala-associated circuitry. I mean, there's a lot of other brain centers involved in this as well, but the amygdala is the hub of the familiar, not familiar process.
Yep.
So let's take another common feeling: hunger. All right. So there's a set point or a baseline for, say, basically glucose levels. There's a set point. Now our blood levels start to get changed from the familiar. That difference is creating a feeling: hunger. The brain wants a match. We feel comfortable when there's a match. So it then causes the feeling of hunger in this case, which is related to then a motivation to bring it back to match. So what do? We go eat something.
Yeah.
Right? Well, what if we're in a situation where we can't eat something?
Oh, we got to tough that out.
Well, but I mean, we've all had this experience, right?
Yeah.
where, you get distracted or you're in the middle of something that it's just not appropriate to, you're in
Right.
the middle of a meeting or something. Well, the brain has a second strategy. We can self-regulate our own inputs, or it's called channels in the brain.
Tell me.
Well, so in this case, we, from a top-down process, inhibit that input. So you don't feel hungry anymore, right? In the short term. Now, if this goes on long enough, the mismatch gets greater and greater. You're finally going to do something,
right?
Get darn aggressive about it eventually.
And we will for food, but maybe we won't for our schedule at work.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to convey here, Sandy, is this process works the same for all the things we're talking about, right? But what you're addressing now, where you've moved into, which I don't normally go into, is that second mechanism the brain has, which is to self-regulate its own inputs.
Okay. Yeah, I think we think about that quite a bit in the biohacking space, which is why I went there.
Right. But that's only temporary. It's done nothing to change the baseline.
Thank you for that. That's helpful, because that's the other input is to shift physiological state, right? It starts with the body. Right. The emotional state, I think we get lost in a whole chicken and egg scenario with emotions and physiological states. Can you talk about what drives what?
Well, say more about what you mean there.
So it is circular, right? Like I can feel a certain way and it changes my physiological state, or I can shift my physiological state and it will change how I feel.
If done enough to where you're starting to adjust the baseline, yes.
And so if I'm interested in adjusting my baseline and I want to take my stress threshold from here to here, what are some clear techniques?
Oh, so easy answer to that. The straightest path is to get into a heart coherent state.
And how?
Well, there's techniques, a bunch of techniques. We call it heart focused breathing. Well, okay, so you ask really good questions, but now first I need to explain, Sandy, that we have in our physiology a literal resonant frequency or coherence frequency, because we started talking about coherence, the harmony, things working together. Well, there's a rhythm, let's say an inner rhythm, where the heart, lungs, brain system, and then many other are related, but those are the primary ones where we're operating most efficiently or effectively together. And you talked about oxygen. Well, being in this resonant rhythm maximizes oxygen exchange within the lungs and the air we're breathing and the expelling CO2 and all that. So there's also a physiological thing we can do to maximize even oxygen utilization, and it has to do with being in our resonant frequency.
And if we're going to go deep with biohacking, that impacts the creation of ATP in our mitochondria, right? When we're
ultimately,
efficiently managing oxygen.
Absolutely. That's downstream. But yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right on. So we just actually published a paper a couple of months ago that looked at, we're getting ready to publish another one that looked at 10 million coherence sessions over 7 years globally.
Wow.
Right. So we have a pretty clear read on global what our resonant frequency is for the population. And I'm getting probably too complicated here, but we probably need an all-day conversation one of these days. But
I would love that.
But anyway, it's if we look at the center of the bell curve, right, of humanity, that resonant frequency is 0.1 hertz in frequency language, which is one cycle in time every 10 seconds. Right. So this is, we were the first to kind of show this. And at that rhythm, that's where all kinds of things start to synchronize together and entrain it.
Didn't you tell me once that that's the frequency of the field line resonance?
Yeah, but now we're yes, okay. It
is. just checking.
It absolutely, it's one of them. That's usually at night, the vibrating field lines of Earth.
Okay.
So I mean, we talk about our research. We talk about synchronization with the fields we live within.
Yes.
Which is an energy source, with others and within our own systems. Right. These are all these different.
And that's why being in nature might feel more at ease for us because we don't have the disruption of the frequencies that surround us in modern living.
Okay, yeah, right, but
we'll go back. The body. And then human natural frequency is
So
0.1 hertz. One cycle every 10 seconds.
Yeah, so, but there's variations around. That's the center of the bell curve. Okay. So breathing, right? We have to breathe anyway, right? So this is something you can do while you're driving, while you're in a conversation, right? Especially if we're starting to feel uncomfortable, tense, impatient, right? Just put your focus of attention in the center of the chest area of your heart. Pretend you're breathing through that, because there's an energetic reason here as well, not just a physiological breathing mechanism. That's important. So 4 or 5 seconds on the in breath, 4 or 5 seconds on the out breath.
Is that 0.1 hertz a cycle for every 10 seconds the reason why it's 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out?
Yeah, because now you're breathing at our natural resonant frequency.
I never knew that. I've been practicing since 2012 with heart math techniques. And I figured it was from observation that you knew.
No, it's way more than that.
Yeah.
It's for me, I've been doing this for 30 years, and we, came out, started publishing this and the coherence and how the system's entrained. So since then, like 6 breaths per minute breathing and slow breathing, it's become everywhere. It's gotten so far. We were the original source of where that came from, right? But there was also, ancient practices that have people breathing without rhythm, but they didn't understand the physiological implications of what's going on. But so you kind of get my drift. So now we're breathing at the body's natural resonant frequency, and that's great. Now here's the thing: if we've done this, so I can say this with confidence, if you go get a bunch of people off the street that aren't biohackers, have no practice in breathing or meditation, these type of techniques, and have them breathe at that rhythm, guess what happens? It's uncomfortable for them.
Oh, yeah.
And they won't do it again, or won't without some, motivation. It's a mismatch to the familiar baseline.
It makes so much sense now, because I started with heart math and then didn't do it for 3 years.
Right.
It was uncomfortable.
So you start more and more the reason why this baseline stuff is so important.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah.
Right. It's also why we don't like change. And we fall back into the same patterns, behavioral patterns, or the same relationship patterns, or the same stress patterns over and over and over, until we can shift that baseline. Am I making it? I keep coming back to that. So
it makes perfect sense. And I think I shifted my baseline when I started to play gongs as a hobby, and found a stillness inside of me by following sounds. That after that, I was able to do heart focused breathing in a way that would shift my state. Whereas before, it caused me more frustration to do it.
Yeah.
So what are some techniques
for
people to get past the frustration that is arising out of the desire to be at ease?
Okay. So, all right. Heart focused breathing, step 1. And, in a way, this is grandma's wisdom, I call it, right? If you're back to one of my grandmas, a little kid, you're running, you fall down, and, that. What does grandma do? Picks you up, make sure you're not squirting blood out or something, right? I mean, really, you're okay. Breathe, honey. Breathe with me, right?
Yeah.
Because breathing is taught everywhere, because it's something we have conscious control of. Right. So now we can add more science to that and understanding that if we start to breathe at our own resonant or coherent frequency, we're now bringing systems into sync way more than a lot of other, so there's other breathing techniques out there that have been around for thousands of years. Not all of them take you into coherence. I won't get into more detail there, but you can kind of get the drift of where I'm going with that.
Well, following thoughts is not going to help you be coherent. If you just sit in stillness and watch all your thoughts go down a river, that's not exactly a coherent.
One of the best ways, to help still the inner systems, I mean, this idea of not having thoughts. I mean, before I learned about heart math and got involved and helped found heart math with Doc Childry, I'd been a multi-year meditator, right? Long meditations. This idea of stopping thoughts, well, I could never do it. But so anyway, that's a whole other topic. But getting coherent is one of the ways to take the intensity, first of all, out of emotions. And now here's step 2. So you can take the intensity out, and practice breathing enough, to where it becomes the new familiar.
I'd love to really pause on that word, intensity, because it goes back to what we said a few minutes ago. Like, you don't want to suppress your emotions. You don't want to block them out.
Right.
But if you can turn down the volume.
Yeah. Right. But you have to turn down the volume before you can shift or transform them. Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah. And that amygdala response is what's governing the volume?
The degree of mismatch, yes. The bigger the mismatch, the more attention it gets. Right? Like, it's novelty, something new, out of the familiar, that's what grabs our attention. It's the same underlying process here. So step 2, while you're doing heart-focused breathing, is now learn to choose and breathe an appropriate feeling. Could be a feeling of inner calm or inner stillness, or it could be breathing in a feeling, drawing in a feeling of patience if you're in a traffic jam. Now we're starting to interrupt the familiar process, right? So now you're changing the afferent or the ascending neural patterns from the heart, going directly to the amygdalas and associating it with that new emotional rhythm or state, like patience, or calm when you're frustrated, or compassionate latitude if somebody's done something that you don't like, and they're upsetting you. That's a huge thing right there, compassionate latitude, to get onto and understand what that's about, right? So breathing that, you follow where I'm going. So this is the way you set a new baseline. You have to have self-awareness.
Okay.
Then you're interrupting the old familiar, literal neural patterns, right? And you have to do this often enough till it becomes the new baseline. And that takes some practice over especially the first few weeks.
How many minutes of heart-focused breathing do you think is important before you layer in an emotion to shift the state?
There's no black and white answer to that, because it depends on, a few things. How deeply ingrained is the old baseline or pattern we're trying to shift? Obviously. How meaningful and genuine are we about our practice? Are we swiping at it, if that makes sense, not really, being heartful about what we're trying to do, or genuine.
Yeah.
Those are some of the key things. But on average, 4 to 6 weeks of tough practice is to really establish a new baseline.
But the sessions themselves.
Yeah, that's where I'm going.
Okay.
I'm going to reference some really neat research that's emerged in the last couple of years, if I may, on that. And not that this would be what I'd recommend for people starting, but these are studies done at USC, University of Southern California, really well done studies, well funded, using MRI, and where they've actually measured these shifts in the brain I'm talking about. So showing increased neural matter, white matter in the frontal cortex, where self-regulation starts from, really. Increased functional connectivity between the frontal cortex and the amygdala. That's our key self-regulation circuit. That's above all this autonomic stuff in the vagus, right? Measurable functional changes just by setting in a coherent state. And they used one of our devices called mWave Pro for these studies. Just setting in coherence. They started most of the studies by the first week doing daily practice of 5 minutes a day. Second week, 10 minutes a day. Third week, 15 minutes a day. Fourth week, 20 minutes a day. Led to these functional, in other words, we're rewiring our brain just by setting there in a heart coherent state for those periods, changing that afferent information. Now, this led to a whole lot of other kind of things that we would want in our life. Reduce stress, reduce mood disturbance, reductions in beta amyloid and tau levels in both young and old populations.
That's fascinating.
Just being coherent.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to my prior hypothesis that coherence aids in detoxification. It
Yeah.
aids in the lymphatic drainage of the brain.
When you're in a coherent rhythm, remember I was saying that you're maximizing fluid exchange and maximizing. In fact, there's another researcher I've been in touch with recently who's showing that that same rhythm is the key rhythm for the clearance systems, not only in the lymphatic system, but also in the subretinal fluid systems as well.
Can we pause on that for a minute too? Because the common wisdom is that there is no system that moves lymph around and that you have to move your body to get the lymphatic system to drain properly. But what you just said is that there is an orderly field, there's an energetic movement of these systems. Can you?
Well, of course there is. Of course there is. I mean, breathing is a huge factor, but it's also breathing, which synchronizes with the heart rhythm, at the coherent rhythm, and then all the afferent neural stuff. Now, that's not to say that movement isn't also important. Now, in fact, what this researcher, some really cool stuff, he's developed new technology to actually non-invasively measure this stuff. That if you, as at the same 5 second or 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out rhythm, you do body movement along with the breathing rhythm, that you are way maximizing that clearance system.
What kind of movement?
It's not
like
wrong.
A qigong movement, or just expanding the lungs, or what kind of movement?
You're actually moving the spine.
Oh, okay.
See what I'm probably hard to see what I'm trying to do here.
Oh, yeah.
But a little slower rhythm that maximizes the cerebral fluid clearance mechanism, but it has to be in sync. And he also found that the natural rhythm for that system is 0.1 hertz. All right, it's the same coherence frequency. So it's not wrong, or it's yes and.
Right.
All right. Does that make sense, Sandy?
It makes perfect sense to me. So I want to recap a little and bring it back to longevity, because we've touched on several systems, and maybe the only one we haven't gotten to yet would be blood pressure as a direct measure of heart function. And since we're talking about heart-focused breathing, but we're talking about shifting our baseline of heart-brain communication in order to bring a sense of efficiency to every system of our bodies. Am I understanding this correctly?
You are correct.
And this affects our immune system, our
hormonal system,
our lymphatic system, our circulation,
right?
Our what have I missed that we've
covered? The digestive system. All the body systems that are more coherent.
And maybe the nervous system, I think, is the one I didn't want to forget.
The nervous system is the driver here. What you were headed somewhere.
Well, speaking of the nervous system, I heard Eric Verdin say the other day that the nervous system and the immune system are the two most important for aging and premature aging, and that they're distributed and get to every part of the body. And so if we're ordering, I see skepticism on your face.
Well, no, that's not wrong, but I just have a hard time limiting it to that because, from as I said, my emotions run the show. Right.
And maybe we in science don't like to deal with the squishy stuff like emotions, but maybe.
But it's not squishy. It's running the show in our bodies. It's so easy to see this, to prove this. This is not.
That's what's so great about talking to you is understanding why emotions aren't squishy. Maybe that's the missing piece that I want to pull back a couple layers on. Why aren't emotions squishy? Let's talk a little bit more about, and we talked about the familiarity and the baseline, but how, I don't feel like I get to choose my emotions, but I do feel like I can influence my physiological state, and then maybe that impacts. What's that nature of? Well, do you know what I'm getting at? I feel like
let me take this, if I may. I'm gonna go wide here if I can on you.
Sure.
So I think I can make, by the way, there's so many statistics on this. I mean, that 90% of doctors' visits to a primary care physician are due to stress-related / emotion disorders, et cetera, et cetera. Emotions drive the hormonal system. There's no question of that. Higher cortisol, lower DHEA, that imbalanced ratio is one of your key biomarkers of accelerated aging. That getting that ratio. I mean, I could go on and on there. Okay. All right. Now, why did I start down this path? I just
because I'm stuck on the chicken and the egg
oh,
between
okay,
emotion and the body.
So let me provide a little bit wider perspective and just into another area of our research that we haven't talked about yet. But so the emotional system, complex system. I mean, there's the biochemical level of emotion and emotional experience. Absolutely true. There's the nervous system, brain nervous system level of emotion. We can measure changes in an emotion. Absolutely true. In fact, I'll just give you an example. If you, I don't know if you remember Candace Pert in her book, The Molecules of Emotion.
I've read it.
Candace was a friend of mine way back then. She passed too early, but in her world, emotions is about biochemistry. Yeah, yes, Candace, but it's not wrong. But you talk to a neuroscientist like Dr. Prebram or me, right? Emotions is about changes in the brain and nervous system, and the amygdala, which precede the changes in the biochemistry and drive those. That's also true and correct. However, there's also another system that's driving even those changes, and that's our energetic system. And with increased self-awareness training and starting to really pay attention, you can start to become aware of what you're feeling at the energetic level and actually track those changes and actually see them in nervous system, heart rhythms, and then the hormonal part, which kicks in later. Right. So we got to get you some help if you think that you can't control your emotions, because I guarantee you can, and anyone can with learning some techniques and some practices.
Well, that's why we're talking, right?
That's why we're talking. Okay, so energetically is what's really running the show, and that's where emotions are happening first. And as we become more aware of that level, that's where they become a lot easier to shift and change before it gets down into the more gross physiological level of changes. It's like
tell me scientifically what you mean by the energetic level, because I know you don't mean it in a squishy way.
I do not, right? Well, in today's world, some people would call it the biofield.
And some people might even think that that's not real. So what are some tangible ways to describe the biofield that makes sense?
There's levels and layers to that. But and let me just give you a brief. I just visited a lab in Spain last year that's doing biophoton emission of whole body. I went there because they published a paper showing that they could measure different biophoton emission in different emotional states.
Oh, wow. I want to read that.
Yeah, it's published. It's a cool lab, right? I mean, we've been showing that emotional states affect the magnetic fields we radiate in a measurable way, right? You can put a probe out here in space called a magnetometer, right? When we put electrodes on the body, all that measures the current flow. You have current flow, you create a magnetic field. We put a magnetometer out here and measure the magnetic fields of the body, especially the heart's the big one, the brain much smaller. And we were able to show that field is carrying emotional state information. This is all published in peer-reviewed stuff, right? I mean, so these are elements of the biofield.
Thank you for explaining it.
Yeah. So when I talk about emotions as frequencies, it's literal.
Yeah.
Because I can measure different vibrational patterns associated with, anger is different than frustration, and as I referred to earlier, right? So there's an energetic level. There really is an energetic level. Right? Well, people write me off if they want, but I would challenge anybody who thinks that's nonsense to prove it's not that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
I think they'll have a very hard time trying to do that.
So if our emotions, are you suggesting that maybe they're in the field?
Well, they certainly are in the fields we can measure. But this is a long-winded way of getting to where I wanted to start this by saying that the emotional system, this complicated system that's really running the show physiologically, is basically neutral. Okay. It can be brought into activity and vibrations and experience from the mind, or the heart.
Okay.
Now, in this case, I mean heart literally as the bridge to the higher dimensional part of our undivided wholeness, right? Now, some people might call it your higher self. Some might call it your soul, your spirit, right? Here at HeartMath, we just call it your larger self because we are multidimensional beings. And I would argue that any living system has to be multidimensional in this respect, right? So you're getting where I'm going with this. So the problem we have, what we have right now if we look at the news, right? Humanity, and for a very, very long time, we are basically a mind-driven, emotional play-out society or culture or planet, basically.
Yeah, we're very much in our headspace
Well, right. So
culturally.
because the mind separates,
Right.
right? So it's that lack of alignment. But really, really, what heart math is about is bringing the mind and emotions into energetic alignment with the intuitive guidance of the heart, meaning your larger self. And this is not a metaphor in my world, right? So
right. No, I know, and I follow, and I I'm playing semantics a little bit
okay,
because it's a
go
rare
for it.
opportunity to be able to bridge someone's understanding who hasn't been studying it as long as I have. And I know you've been doing this for 30 years, and you're continuously like sitting with me today to explain in a way that we can hopefully reach more people for the purpose of living longer, healthier lives. When you described emotion in that way, what I sensed, because when you said it was neutral,
The emotional system,
the emotional system is neutral.
right?
So I never really thought about an emotional system like a hormonal system.
Right.
Is it a signal? Like
Well, no,
thoughts are
it's a
electrical
complex.
impulses.
It's a complex system. It involves the biochemistry, neural, and energetic levels that are all integrated across. It's a system. Like the hormonal system is a very complex system. The immune system, you can't nail it down to one thing, right? Um,
It's so beautiful to describe an emotional system rather than identifying isolated feelings,
yeah.
anger, frustration,
Well, see, but
impatience,
right, but so frustration and impatience are creating these vibrations
states.
at the energetic level, measurable changes in the brain nervous system we've been measuring for years, and then also measurable changes in hormonal outflows and immune system function. But it all
And
starts with the energetic level. So you've got those types. That's what I mean by mind,
yeah,
right? Frustration and irritation, the list. Or you can set the emotional system into a very different rhythmic and frequency activity. Like when you fall in love, Sandy, do you say, I love you with all my brain?
no.
You get my, right? So, but still, when you walk out the door in the morning, and it's just one of those kind of like it is here today, actually. Perfect temperature, blue skies. You go, oh, what a beautiful day. You're feeling appreciation or awe. You may not think that because the mind's in its own little world there, but that's created a very different pattern of vibration energetically and then neurally, hormonally, right? Am I just starting to make sense?
Yes. So now I want to bring it back to action. I want to bring it back to let's just assume everyone is where I am in full understanding of what we've been discussing.
Okay.
And I do have a new framing for emotion that I didn't have an hour ago. So I'm super excited about that.
Awesome.
To see it as a system that I mean, I knew it impacted a bunch of things, but I've taken it from like a thing which happens in my mind. The mind likes to label. I've taken it from
Mhm.
these little
Right.
isolated labels.
Mhm.
And if I consider that I have an emotional system, then I have something to regulate.
Right.
Like I don't want to
Yes.
regulate a little thing here and there that's tedious.
No, you want the system, right? And this is the
Right.
key to longevity, but not only living longer, but living longer healthy,
Yes.
right?
Adding life to our years.
Right, because you start to understand now what's really running the show. So it's really pretty simple. It's really, you could say, open the heart. And I know I sound squishy here, but I mean this in a way that's opening that connection to our higher dimensional part of us, our undivided wholeness, right? With that
And
energetic
bringing
system.
order to a dysregulated system.
Yes.
Opening the heart
Right.
brings coherence
Yeah.
to the systems of the body, including the emotional system.
Well, yeah. So we're really connecting with our own intuitive guidance from our own personal larger self. That really is our best friend that knows what's best for us.
And I think it seems overly simplistic to say, focus your attention on your heart and breathe at a steady pace, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. But there's a physiological, there's a cascade of things that are happening when you do that,
Yes.
right? So can you also go into vagal response and
Well,
some other
sure.
things?
I mean, we can go back down to the physiology, but just wanted to make the comment there. Yes, you want to breathe 4 or 5 seconds in, but we also say in heart focused breathing, find the rhythm that's comfortable.
Yeah.
Because we don't want you stuck in your head counting.
I've done that.
Right, because you're not making that energetic shift I'm talking about. So now get yes, do that for a while until you get the rhythm familiar. Then forget about all this counting. Right, really drop down in and activate feelings. It could be I don't care, a feeling of patience, a feeling of appreciation, whatever, or just neutral. Right, or a feeling of ease is a really beginning one to start with. Now, because now you're starting to shift the energetic level, not just through a conscious pace breathing, which is just physiology, which is important and a lot of benefit, but it's not the big game practice here. I hope I'm making some sense. But.
You are. So I think that there are levels, though. I think that people,
sure,
because it's bumping up against a familiar baseline that is accustomed to frustration,
right?
The techniques they're a necessary crutch to get started.
Yeah.
No,
right? Yeah, the reason that we have the world we do is people have not. I mean, this is everything I'm talking about today has been in philosophy, right, and different things for ever, thousands of years. It's this is real, but the how-to is what's been missing.
so
right?
For me,
and the science, I would say.
I chant or hum when I do my 5 seconds in, and then I hum out for 5 seconds because I feel like, just from experience and monitoring my HRV, I have uncommonly low HRV for my age.
How do you know that?
I use my Apple Watch to.
Okay, well, how do you know how do you know it's low for your age?
I've looked at charts online, and I'm typically
be really careful.
Okay.
Because that there's so much. In fact, at the Biohacker conference that we were at, that is the thing. People kept coming up to me. It was almost like they were lined up, saying, "My HRV is low." Well, how do you know that? Well, my Oura rings said so. And I said, "What?" It's. In fact, I'm getting ready to do a whole presentation just on this because there's so much confusion.
Oh,
now there are ways to find out, what your age-related HRV is, but it's not looking at your Apple Watch and some chart out there.
Well, when I'm kind of going about my day, it'll drop into the teens.
Okay, so what?
Okay, so what? Tell me, so what? Is that cause for alarm? Does that not indicate that maybe my baseline is at a threshold of higher stress?
All right, let me go ahead. Before we go to there, and I'm happy to go here, and I'll try and be concise, but everything we've been talking about so far is really, I think, why it is so important for people to actually get an app and measure their level of heart rhythm coherence and practice shifting into coherence, because that's the straightest pathway to setting that new baseline and opening that gateway to better emotional self-regulation.
and a longer, healthier life.
Yeah, and feeling better while you do it, right? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, think of a world without emotion.
Mm.
We wouldn't care about anything. We wouldn't have the hobby, I mean, on and on it goes. All right, so now let's go back to, because there's a big difference between measuring HRV and using HRV as a training tool to get our physiology into an optimal state, coherence training, basically, right? Okay, so now let's click on where you're wanting to go, the amount of HRV.
Mm-hmm.
So the how much, or you could think of the amplitude. If you've got an app like one of our apps that shows you the actual rhythm, you can actually see it in beats per minute, the amplitude of it. So I'm going to just refer to that, how much HRV we have. First and foremost to understand is to really measure the how much HRV, overall HRV a person has, is best done over a 24-hour assessment.
Okay.
Because if you actually look, most people never have seen HRV, where you actually look at it, the actual HRV over a whole day and night.
Yeah, it's hard to get an output of that.
Well, we do it all the time. That's what we do, 24-hour HRV. We've been doing this for years for clinics all around the world, mostly functional medicine clinics, thousands of these. So when you actually look at it, you start to get a much more intuitive understanding of what's going on, of how, our thoughts and emotions, especially emotions, are actually reflected in these patterns of HRV. I mean, I can look at a rhythm and tell somebody's got a baseline of anxiety, a 24-hour measure, almost instantly. It just shows right up in their rhythms. Daytime, nighttime, radically different. 1 minute to the next can be very different. That's why it's called heart rate variability.
Yes. It's variable.
It's variable. It's varying. In fact, it's varying if you look over different time scales with so many things. It's varying with the geomagnetic environment. There's a slow wave rhythm that actually exists in the heart rhythms. There's the day-night rhythms, circadian rhythms. There's the what's called very low frequency rhythms, which are associated with the intrinsic cardiac nervous system and the heart brain. And there's the LF rhythms, which is our heart-brain coherence frequency. Then there's the breathing rhythms. All this is in these heart rhythms. It's all kind of mushed in together in these complex looking waveforms.
And you can look at a readout of that and predict if someone experiences a high level of anxiety. Going back to
you look at the patterns.
System.
Okay, so there's two things. So most people are fixated on, and I've heard something about the amount of variability. High variability good, low variability bad, right?
That's the common belief out there. So.
Well, but it's true, but we got to understand the context by which we're saying that. And that's what's missing in so much of the apps and things.
And why I'm so thrilled to get to have this conversation with you, because
all right, so
it matters.
So we start with the 24-hour is really your best clinical way to know how much HRV we have. Mm-hmm. Okay, because you're looking over a whole day and all these different contexts. Now, there are short-term ways you can get a measurement, but I'm not going to go there yet, that are fairly accurate. Now, here's the thing. We have the more amount or a bigger amplitude, basically, of HRV when we're young, and it gets less as we age. This is what you kind of referred to earlier.
Yeah.
However, it takes about 2 years of age to be able to detect a change in the amount of HRV, right? But it is a fairly linear process across aging, right? So 2 years to see a change in normal aging.
Okay.
This is a very slow process.
Yeah. Well, aging is a slow process.
Well, right. And actually HRV you could think of as a measure of flexibility.
Right.
And aging, one of the hallmarks of aging is loss of flexibility. That's not just physically, mentally, emotionally, right? All right. Anyway, that's a little side note. So now here's the thing. So if we're going to talk about how much HRV, it has to be always in the context of age.
But with practice, can we shift out of that aging pattern?
Well, you can slow it.
Okay.
Right? But there's biological realities here too. And you can increase it. Now let me, all right, so there's so many places we could go here, but let's say within a given age, 30, 50, whatever, there's a reference range that is based on In fact, one of our most referenced papers in the field is a paper we published many years ago in combination with a very famous cardiologist that established the normal reference ranges for 24-hour majors from age 9 to 99. That was a lot of work to do that, right? Because you have to get a lot of healthy people at each of those ages, right? And aren't taking medications, and are basically healthy in a verified way.
Yeah.
Now you find that for each age, that reference range is pretty wide.
Yes.
So the way I think of it is you've got the top of the range, the higher amount of availability for a given age, are people who are doing everything right. There's a genetic factor to a certain degree, but they're biohackers, put it that way, right?
Or they exercise, or they.
Well, they're doing all those things.
Right,
They're managing especially managing their stress, because I'm going to come back to that. Then you've got more the bottom of the reference range. These are the folks I call the healthy couch potatoes.
Okay.
Right? Still healthy, they're not taking drugs or medications and so on. So that's a pretty wide range. Now you can bounce around within that normative range day to day based on the sleep you got, the stress you had the day before, and so on. But you're not moving in and out of, a low HRV.
Okay.
Right. You follow what I mean? And these are kind of subtler short-term effects that really aren't to do with this long-term aging process. Now, with that context understood, when you see HRV declining faster than the normal age-related decline, that's when you got a problem.
Well, that's a predictor of all-cause mortality, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Which is why biohackers who are wearing these devices are concerned.
Well, right, but it's not telling you what I'm talking about.
Right.
It's bouncing around within that normative range.
Right.
Okay, probably.
So when I have a variance of mid-teens without intention to sitting with intention to send afferent signals of ease and gratitude to my emotional system.
Right.
And I'll jump into the 70s with it when I sit with intention.
Great. Okay. But again, you're looking at short-term measures.
Right.
All right. So let me just finish
cumulative?
this. Well, let me just finish this story, if I may. Okay. Yeah. So it's the number one reason, and I can say this with a lot of confidence, having done many thousands of 24-hour assessments for clinics all over the world and talking to physicians and stuff. The number one reason that we have a faster decline than the normal age-related decline in HRV is emotional dysregulation. It's long-term chronic stress. And it doesn't show up as low. I'm talking about overall HRV now, not the bouncing around stuff that you see in a minute or 2 minute like the Apple Watch does. Okay.
Right.
All right. And this is an important distinction I'm trying to make here, Sandy, that can release a lot of stress and worry for people if they really get what I'm trying to say here. Okay. So you follow me so far, right? Now
yes,
that
but I think it might cause a little worry too, because
we'll come back to how to actually measure HRV in a second. If you don't mind.
Yes.
So, but you don't end up with low age-related HRV because you had a bad day.
No, it's from chronic stress.
Or a bad week or a bad month even.
Right.
It's long-term accumulated stress.
But isn't that
number
common?
one reason? I'm sorry?
Isn't that common though?
It's pretty common. Yes, that's the problem.
Okay.
And that's why 90% of doctor's visits are due to stress-related disorders, right?
Right, but they don't really know how to help you get beyond that.
Well, that's true. Okay, second reason for low HRV is disease. Usually something to do with inflammation, an inflammatory process.
Okay.
Which is taking out the nervous system.
Yeah, right.
Right. So that's why it's associated and predictive of heart disease, cancer, metabolic list. It's a very long list. All right. Am I making sense so far?
Well, also chronic stress could cause chronic inflammation.
Well, absolutely. That's why I said number one reason.
Number one reason, chronic stress.
Chronic stress.
Cascades down to chronic inflammation, perhaps.
It can be,
but
but
other
I don't.
things cause inflammation besides stress.
Right. But I'm not going to say that every disease is because of stress.
Right.
That would be too much. I mean, there can be lots of environmental, genetic,
right. Absolutely.
Stuff going on there. Okay. So
can we clear out the inflammation through states of coherence?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, especially if it's the emotional stress related driven sources.
Right. And
Right.
that's about
Now,
the ordering the system and creating efficiencies, and it
yeah, right.
improves the lymphatic and the lymphatic drainage.
Yes.
And
Right.
yeah,
So if you're in a depleted state, you really do have low HRV for your age,
yeah.
which you have to be very specific protocol to really answer that question. And let me just say a little bit more here. You have to be very careful when comparing short-term measures to some database of norms, because the way you collect the data to create the normative database has to be exactly the same as the assessment you're doing. It has to be exactly the same time length, right? And this is where a lot of mistakes get made,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I've literally seen people freaked out because they were comparing a short-term measure to a 24-hour measure. I mean, they are radically different.
Yeah.
Right? Or you can't compare a 1 minute to a 5 minute. You can't compare a resting state to a deep breathing. I mean, see, it gets a little more complex. So that's why context is so important here.
And is it sometimes challenging to know if we're in a depleted state, if it has become our baseline?
Well, yes, because it's our baseline, right? It's
Right.
familiar, right?
Right.
Um,
We
but
just,
am I making sense on this HRV stuff? So
yes. So don't worry too much about single readings. Look
yeah,
at
it's really the
trends,
pattern over
perhaps.
time. I mean, the short-term stuff is great. I have an Apple Watch, and right now, well, there's so many places we could go here, but we spent a couple of years, this is a while back, asking. It was amazing that nobody had ever done this yet, because people started, 24 hours, the gold standard, for ages in HRV research. Then people start doing these, the vagal activity became the big thing, and
Mhm.
which is appropriate. And there's reasons for that. So we started doing these short-term measures, like 5 minute resting state, or like Apple Watch is you find the time on your arm still from the accelerometer, do a 1 minute recording, right?
Mhm.
It gives you SDNN in that case. So a couple things happened. A lot of the interpretations from 24-hour measures started being brought into these short-term measures, which is completely wrong to do because it's a different context, right? But anyway, nobody had really asked the question: do these short-term measures correlate to 24-hour measures? So we did a study. It was a few years to do this, and where we actually tested a number of short-term data collection protocols along with 24-hour measures to see if there what would be the best correlation.
Hmm.
Now, as it turns out, there is a short-term protocol. And as life would have it, it was the simplest and shortest of all that we got pretty exotic, all the things we were trying, but the shortest, simplest was the best.
And
And
what was that?
it's a 1 minute paced deep breathing assessment.
Okay.
Okay, the steps are, and this is really important. If you don't do, a lot of people need a practice session. You pace them at the coherence frequency. That's
Yeah.
important because when we're breathing, well, not just breathing, but when our system is operated in that frequency, that gives you higher HRV. You can see that just using one of the apps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you breathe as deeply as you comfortably can for that 1 minute, at that rhythm, you're basically asking the question. It's a challenge test. You're asking the question, what is the maximum heart rate variability, the whole neural axis, right? Because you have the heart, the intrinsic cardiac nervous system, the efferent and afferent pathways in both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, brainstem, higher brain systems, all have to align to create that highest amount of variability. So that, if done properly, that actually has a 0.8 or an 80% accurate correlation to 24-hour measures. But then we had to develop norms using that exact protocol across the aging span, right? Because you can't use resting state norms for that, right?
Yeah.
So we did that, and that was published, Heart Mind Journal, if I remember right.
Okay.
So we established the normative ranges for that assessment. Whereas like a 1 minute resting state does not have good correlations to your age-related HRV. That's why I said, how do you know your HRV is low?
Right.
right?
Well, I mean, I look at it all the time, but point well made that
Right.
I'm not using a standard way of checking, and I'm letting myself get freaked out because I put it right on the face of my watch.
Mhm.
Right now it says 41, which
Okay.
is really high for me engaged in a conversation, but I love this conversation, right? I'm in a heart-centered state at this
Right.
moment
Yeah.
because I'm
Yeah.
enjoying it so much. If I was on a boring webinar, it might be a 23, right?
Yeah.
Like it just, but
You
also it might
just
not mean anything.
you just made a great case for what I've been saying this whole time,
What's that?
that our emotions are reflected in our HRV.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
Right. So, right. Anyway, so it's not that there isn't use for short-term measures and tracking those changes over time. Right. Because
Right.
like sleep, but the point is it's bouncing around within this rather wide normative range. Right.
And so we've gone definitely over the hour that we allotted, and I know I want to let you get on with your day, but I want to recap a couple of things just so that people are that they understand how this relates back to longevity.
Mm-hmm.
We have an emotional system,
Mm-hmm.
which I never considered until today. So I'm going to take that as fact. We have an emotional system
Mm-hmm.
that is the source of vitality, really. It has the greatest impact on our ability to operate efficiently inside of our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Am I accurate in saying that?
You are. You are.
And through the course of living, we have created disruptions to our emotional system, the way that a cold might cause a disruption to our immune system. And so we're operating inefficiently if we have accumulated stressors. And if we care about living well for longer, then we've got to find an entry point into the emotional system in order, because there's a cascading effect from that to the physical system. And so we've got to find a way in order to bring a coherent and efficient state to our mind and heart and
Body.
endocrine and emotional and everything else, that it all comes together, and that entry point is annoyingly simple. It's almost too good to be true, except that it causes frustration in people who don't have it as their baseline.
Right.
That entry point is heart-focused breathing, that after a period of time, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, layer in a sense. I like to call it a sense rather than a feeling. Layer in a sense of compassion or a sense of gratitude or
ease or inner stillness or patience.
One of these things, and I didn't understand why until today. I thought that they had some sort of magical power in some way, but you're just sending a different signal to the amygdala so that when it's gauging the familiar, it has a new familiar baseline.
Yeah, over time.
Introducing, right, yeah. Over time. And yeah, it's fascinating to me.
And that's when this becomes transformational in people's lives. Truly transformational.
Yeah. What would you like to leave us with?
Wow. Pause throughout the day as often as you can remember to, and set reminders if you need to. And ask yourself, what am I feeding the field? What vibrations? I just touched lightly on it because we really do have a measurable, this is not aura nonsense, field we can measure. That is, what we feel inside doesn't stop at the skin. We are literally broadcasting it to all of our cells. This is the ultimate source of epigenetic information, the vibrations in our field. But it's also broadcasting out and affecting other people in measurable ways. So become more self-responsible for what we're feeding the field. And if you find that you're feeding your own energetic field and all your cells and the field we're radiating to others in the world, to be one that's more impatient or frustrated or anxious or worried or fearful. Do some hard shift. Do some hard focus breathing. Draw in one of those regenerative emotions, right? And just remember to do that as often as you can throughout the day.
Perfect. Thank you.